The Morrison family's annual professional photo session at grandfather's estate was in full swing when Uncle Richard decided to address what he called the success representation problem. 35 relatives arranged themselves across the mansion's marble steps while a professional photographer captured images for the family's business holiday cards. At 27, I stood quietly near the garden fountain, still treated as the family's perpetual underachiever. The niece who worked what everyone assumed was some mundane international relations job that barely qualified as a real career compared to my cousin's impressive corporate positions. My cousin David, 29, commanded attention at the center of the photo arrangement, discussing his latest promotion to senior marketing director while other relatives celebrated achievements that made sense to successful business families. "Time to organize the formal business portrait," Uncle Richard announced, consulting his expensive watch. "Our holiday cards go to Fortune 500 executives and major clients. Image management is absolutely crucial." The family began arranging themselves according to their perceived professional accomplishments. Business owners in front, corporate executives in the middle, and other professionals scattered around according to Uncle Richard's clearly understood hierarchy. "Sarah, honey," he called out as I approached the group, "maybe you should sit this one out." I paused, confused by the sudden exclusion. "What do you mean?" "Well," he explained with diplomatic awkwardness, "not achievement-oriented for photos, you understand. These images represent our family's business credibility to important contacts." The cousins giggled appreciatively at Uncle Richard's practical concern. Cousin Lisa, a pharmaceutical sales manager, shook her head sympathetically. "Nothing wrong with government work, Sarah, but it doesn't exactly project success for our professional network." "Exactly," added Cousin Michael, who worked in commercial real estate development. "The formal photos should showcase family members who've actually built impressive careers." I felt the familiar sting of being excluded from family recognition, but this time was different. My secure phone had been vibrating all morning with encrypted messages from the embassy security office. "Besides," Uncle Richard continued, positioning David and other successful cousins prominently, "your little international filing job doesn't really fit the image we want to project to serious business leaders." The photographer began adjusting his equipment while relatives discussed their latest professional achievements. They had no idea that my filing job involved coordinating security protocols for diplomatic missions across 3 continents. "Sarah just processes paperwork for some international agency," David explained to his new girlfriend. "Steady work, but not exactly leadership material." Through the estate's iron gates, I noticed unusual activity on the main road. Multiple black vehicles had positioned themselves at strategic intervals, their occupants maintaining the alert posture of professional protection officers. My diplomatic security detail was arriving right on schedule. The professional photo session continued with elaborate positioning as Uncle Richard directed relatives according to their corporate accomplishments. David stood proudly in the center with other business leaders, while professionals arranged themselves in a carefully orchestrated display of family success. "This is exactly the image our business network expects," Uncle Richard declared, surveying the arrangement. "Successful people projecting competence and achievement." Grandfather consulted his gold pocket watch with obvious satisfaction. "The holiday card recipients will be impressed by this year's representation. Strong showing from finance, real estate, and corporate leadership." I remained near the fountain, watching the elaborate choreography while monitoring increasingly urgent communications on my encrypted device. The embassy was requesting immediate coordination on a developing security situation. "Sarah, dear," Aunt Margaret called out from her position in the photo, "you could help organize the refreshments while we finish the important documentation." The suggestion was delivered with kindness, but the message was clear. Accomplished family members posed for business photos while others provided support services. "Actually," I said, walking toward the main photo area, "I should mention that I'm expecting some colleagues shortly." Uncle Richard looked annoyed. "Sarah, we're documenting family achievements for professional distribution. Your work friends can wait until we finish showcasing actual business success." The photographer was adjusting lighting when the first sign appeared. Additional black vehicles moving into position along the estate's perimeter. Professional, discreet, but clearly establishing a comprehensive security presence. "What are all those official-looking cars doing?" Cousin Lisa asked, squinting toward the gates. Before anyone could speculate, 6 men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles and approached the estate's main entrance. They moved with the coordinated precision of trained protection officers, their earpieces and alert postures immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with government security protocols. "Excuse me," the lead agent called out as they reached the photo area. "We're looking for Deputy Chief of Mission Sarah Morrison." The family photo session stopped abruptly as 35 relatives turned to stare at the federal agents who had just requested their unsuccessful family member. "That would be me," I replied, stepping forward professionally. "Ma'am," the agent continued, "Ambassador Chen has arrived at the embassy for the emergency security briefing. Your coordination is required immediately." Uncle Richard's expensive camera equipment suddenly seemed much less important as relatives processed the implications of diplomatic security requesting their paperwork filing niece. "Deputy Chief of Mission?" Grandfather whispered weakly from his wheelchair. "Yes, sir," the lead agent replied respectfully. "Deputy Chief Morrison coordinates embassy security operations across the European theater. Today's briefing involves threat assessments requiring immediate diplomatic response." The lead security agent consulted his secure tablet while 35 relatives stood motionless in their achievement-oriented photo poses, suddenly understanding they'd been excluding someone with actual governmental authority. "Ma'am," he continued professionally, "the ambassador specifically requested your assessment for the NATO Security Conference. Allied representatives are standing by for your threat analysis briefing." Uncle Richard's proud business portrait had transformed into a frozen tableau of shock and dawning comprehension as relatives realized the family member they deemed not achievement-oriented was actually coordinating international security operations. "NATO Security Conference?" Cousin Michael croaked. "Deputy Chief Morrison developed the current protocols for embassy threat assessment across allied nations," the agent explained. "Her framework has become standard for diplomatic security coordination throughout Europe." The photographer lowered his expensive camera, sensing that the carefully arranged business portrait had been superseded by something far more significant. "But you said you worked in international relations," Lisa whispered desperately. "I said I worked in diplomatic security," I corrected gently. "When I mentioned coordinating with foreign governments, you assumed I meant filing visa applications. When I said I traveled internationally for security briefings, you thought I meant attending administrative training." Aunt Margaret found her voice from her position in the collapsed photo arrangement. "Sarah, how long have you been doing this work?" 6 years, I replied. "Since I left the consulting firm to join the Foreign Service. My first assignment was the Embassy Security Review in Prague. Since then I've been point person for threat coordination across 12 diplomatic posts." Another agent approached with obvious urgency. "Ma'am, the ambassador's briefing is scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. The security situation requires immediate assessment." "Copy that," I replied professionally, then turned to address the stunned family. "I should handle this coordination. International security threats don't wait for photo sessions." Uncle Richard was staring at the scattered business portrait props as if they'd personally betrayed him. "Sarah, when you said you worked overseas, I meant I coordinate security assessments with host nation intelligence services and brief congressional delegations on embassy protection protocols," I finished. "But you heard paperwork processing, because that's what you expected to hear." The diplomatic security team was already establishing communication protocols with their headquarters while relatives watched their unsuccessful family member coordinate classified government operations on grandfather's front lawn. "The emergency briefing involves potential threats to Allied diplomatic facilities," the lead agent announced. "Deputy Chief Morrison's assessment will directly influence security decisions for embassy personnel across Europe." Cousin David was frantically Googling on his phone. "The Deputy Chief of Mission. That's like the second highest position at an embassy. For security operations, yes," I confirmed. "I coordinate protection protocols for diplomatic personnel, assess threat environments, and liaise with host governments on security matters that could affect bilateral relations." The family members who'd been giggling about my lack of promotions now realized they'd been patronizing someone whose work influenced international relations and diplomatic safety across multiple countries. "Ma'am," the lead agent urged, "Ambassador Chen is waiting for your threat assessment." As I walked toward the diplomatic vehicles with my security detail, I could hear confused whispers behind me as relatives tried to process the revelation that their not achievement-oriented family member was actually advising ambassadors on matters of international security. The family photo session never resumed as relatives spent the remainder of the afternoon processing the revelation that their excluded family member was actually coordinating classified security operations for diplomatic missions across Europe. Uncle Richard's carefully planned business portrait had been replaced by federal agents establishing temporary communications on the estate grounds. "Sarah," Uncle Richard said quietly as diplomatic vehicles departed following my security briefing, "I owe you an enormous apology. We had no idea about your actual responsibilities." "You had no idea because you never asked," I replied. "For 6 years, you've dismissed my work as international filing, while I've been developing security protocols that protect diplomatic personnel overseas. But why didn't you correct our assumptions?" Aunt Patricia asked weakly. "Because most of my work is classified," I explained. "I can't discuss the details of threat assessments or security coordination. The parts one could mention, you've spent years assuming were routine administrative tasks." 3 months later, when my work on embassy security enhancement earned recognition from the Secretary of State, Uncle Richard framed the commendation letter and placed it prominently in grandfather's study. The annual family holiday cards that year featured a simple group photo rather than the elaborate achievement-oriented arrangement Uncle Richard had planned. The diplomatic security incident had taught the family that success sometimes operates behind classified doors. Cousin David learned to ask about my international assignments rather than assume them, discovering that his unsuccessful cousin was actually protecting American diplomatic interests in ways that influenced global stability. The photographer later submitted his candid shots of the security coordination to a photojournalism competition, winning recognition for capturing the moment when assumptions about family success were dramatically overturned by reality. Ambassador Chen's thank you note to the family became a treasured artifact, acknowledging the estate's cooperation in facilitating emergency security coordination during a family gathering. The garden fountain where I'd been relegated during photo preparation now features a small plaque commemorating the day when diplomatic security operations interrupted family achievement documentation, serving as a reminder that the quietest family member might be protecting American interests while relatives are arranging business portraits. The business holiday cards that Uncle Richard had planned to send to Fortune 500 executives were replaced with a simple family photo and a brief note about the Morrison family's pride in members who serve American interests overseas.